All right. All right, good evening, everybody. We've reached the third and final installment of this Suicide Prevention and Awareness Strategies workshop. We've gone through different ways to recognize, ways to respond. We covered that last night. Today, we're going to be easing our way into the refer category and looking on how we can refer individuals that might be contemplating different levels of suicidal ideation. One thing I want to talk about before we get started is when you walked in, you grabbed that little packet, and there's 3 pages on that packet. One is the outline, the working outline that we'll be covering today, this evening. The second page